I've asked Marlene to share her experience with this step.
Thanks, Matt. I'm Marlene, I'm an alcoholic, and I've been through this process with the help of a loving and patient sponsor and grand sponsor, having made all but one amend and practicing steps 10, 11, 12 to the best of my ability and willingness. There, is that better?
Oh, much.
Okay. So Matt asked me to speak in the beginning of February, and I said, yeah, I can speak as long as it's not on the sex inventory. And he said, I don't know, I haven't counted out the weeks. So of course I said yes, because I was taught never to say no in AA. Then I went home and counted the weeks and said, shit. So, I panicked at that point because I really didn't understand this portion of the inventory and reached out to my sponsor, and she said, it's not about your sexcapades, and it's not about your sex toys, and it's not about that and how many partners you had. It's about I wrote it down because I can't remember. It's about sorry.
You're doing fine.
It's about conduct and relationships, and how I conducted myself with my relationships with men, and so thank God for that information, because I really would be at a loss today. So give a little bit of my background. My therapist actually brought me to my first open AA meeting in Chelmsford, where I was handed a big book from a woman who won it that night. I took it home, saw the word God, slammed it shut until 3 years ago. So I got sober in 1983. So I was 38 years into AA before I came to Big Book Step Study. I was at my hairdresser's. A lot of you might know Holly C. And she, God did for me what I couldn't do for myself, because I was seeing a different hairdresser who was not all there, and decided I needed somebody new, and remembered that Holly was a hairdresser. So I said, oh, okay. So I made an appointment and sat in her chair, and we started talking about AA stuff, and I said, I'm miserable. It's like, is that all there is? Because I was attending open meetings, the Looney Nooner in Maynard, and 12 and 12 meetings. And that was it. And I was restless, irritable, and discontented. So she told me about a women's Big Book Step Study that was happening at the time. It was happening in Bolton. And I'm like, but it's all women. And she said, but they're a great, they're an awesome, that's what she said. They're an awesome bunch of women. So I'm like, I was miserable enough to walk through that fear and go to that meeting. Knees were knocking, I gotta say, knees were knocking walking through that door, but I did it because I was so miserable. And so let's see. Oh, the other thing Holly said was Big Book Step Study, and that process that you will go through with a sponsor will be the best gift you will ever give yourself. She's absolutely right. And I will forever be grateful to Holly for that push to get me into this hall and other Big Book Step studies. Okay, now about sex. So, I began drinking and dating, that's a joke, at 14. And, one of the first guys I went out with was 18. My parents didn't know he was that old and whatever. And I've been attracted to the bad boys my whole drinking time. The worse they were, the more I liked them. And I finally, I think I figured out why that was after many, many years of wondering what that was, and lots of therapy. And it just never came to me until I really prayed on it and started meditating about it. And both of my parents worked when I was little, and they were immigrant parents. They spoke only Polish, so I didn't know Polish, so they had this secret code between the two grandparents, and we had no idea what they were talking about. And they watched us 5 days a week, along with an emotionally abusive Uncle Eddie, who was a horrible, horrible person. And I believe my attraction to abusive men all stemmed from this relationship. And at 14, I began to set my sights on the baddest boy in the school. And, I was going to find a way for him to love me. My first victim, Jeffrey Alcott, who's now passed, but so I can talk about him. He was fresh out of juvenile hall. And, when I came home and told my mom that, I had this crush on this guy and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and she worked for the school system, so she knew him. But, she never said, don't go near him. It was like, oh, okay, well, Anyway, that relationship lasted about a few weeks. Once he got what he wanted from me, I was dropped like a hot potato. So, where was I selfish? And, I wanted only bad boys, no matter how my reputation suffered. Where was I dishonest? And what was the lie I told? Well, what was the lie I told myself? The lie I told myself was the more I drank, the sexier I got. Puking is very sexy. What was the truth? The truth was the more I drank, the less inhibited I became, and I no longer feared those bad boys. Where was I inconsiderate? So I treated any good guys like dirt. Once I knew that they liked me. It's like I wanted nothing to do with them. I became very, very mean, and I hurt them badly. The best example I can give is I went with my best friend to a bar one night, and we're sitting at the bar, and these two guys come over and they're hitting on us, and I'm like, and I'm getting loaded, and I said, why don't you guys come over for breakfast because it was like closing time. So they're like, sure, you know. So we brought him over to my apartment and I made scrambled eggs and we ate. And I said, well, I'm going to bed. And I went to bed, promptly went to bed, slammed my door shut, locked it, and I went to bed. Left my best friend out there with these two strangers. I mean, how selfish to her, who I love more than I love my sister, and how cruel. I mean, that really was cruel to the guys. I mean, you know, they were expecting a lot more than scrambled eggs. And, you know, we just said, you know, and finally I opened the door and said, okay, everybody out. So, you know, the two guys left. The next morning I woke up and everything from their trunk and in the interior of their car was on the lawn because they were so pissed. And I'm really amazed that's all they did. But so that's the kind of stuff I used to do. You know, and one other thing was going to another bar, and there was a guy with a cowboy hat on, and I'm like, ugh, what is that all about? And went up to him, and I just kicked him in the shins because I didn't like his hat. And you know, he didn't, thank God, he didn't do anything to me. He just turned and walked away. That still amazes me to this day. And at that same bar, not the same night, but there was a biker that came in. We knew he was like the worst guy in the county. And, you know, of course I got to flirt with him. And eventually he literally threw me over his shoulder and brought me outside. So, you know, it's like, oh my God, that could have been so bad. This guy was so bad that he dumped his Harley. Now this is back late 70s. He dumped his Harley, and they were made there was no plastic on those old Harleys. Dumped his Harley and dented the gas tank with his leg. That was John Lewis, yep. Anyway, so those are the kind of stupid things and mean things and inconsiderate. I mean, that's more than inconsiderate, but just mean things that I did. Eventually, you know, I would watch my sister, my non-alcoholic sister, who was 10 years older than me, and she had a loving husband and two little boys, and I knew what a good marriage looked like, and I wanted that. My parents did not have a good marriage, but they stuck together no matter what. But my sister definitely had what I wanted, but I didn't know how to get there. And eventually, I lived with her for a little while. She was thinking I would be her nanny for her two little boys, and that obviously didn't work out because I was never home, and eventually I went back. I got my first therapist, and he said a lot of things that resonated. One was, did you ever think about every time you got in trouble, alcohol was involved? And I I'm like, no. But then, in thinking about it, he was absolutely right. I had never, every time I had sex, I was drunk. I never, ever had sober sex, ever. I couldn't do it. So, that was very interesting. So getting in trouble, not being able to do that without being drunk. And he told me that. And then I went back to live with my sister. They actually took me back. And I met my current husband. Anyway, the old husband. I met my first husband in high school. We were high school sweethearts. We dated for 9 years, and now I'm still active at this point. He's really active, and he was a big coke dealer, really big dealer at the time. And so so we dated for 9 years, and I wanted what my sister had, so we're going to get married. And we got married in October, and we went home to my parents in Connecticut for Christmas in December, and then he didn't want to come back to Massachusetts. He wanted to stay with his henchmen and just sit around and do drugs all day. So January 2nd, I filed for divorce. 2.5 months we were married. And then eventually, through mutual friends, I met my current husband, who was so different than anybody. Now, I was seeing that therapist about maybe getting sober. Maybe I was an alcoholic. And that's when I met my husband. And we went on our first date. I got sober the day we went on our first date that night. It was crazy. So this was, we're sitting there and they have these lounge chairs and everything in this restaurant. And I'm like, how do I do this? I was like a deer in the headlights. I didn't know how to talk. I didn't know how this night was going to end without a drink. It was terrifying. And it went well. And then after a few weeks of dating him, no, I don't know. This is as inappropriate as I'm going to get. But we were driving down 495, and I said, go to the Howard Johnsons. Now, this was when it was still a Howard Johnsons. I said, go to the Howard Johnsons. We're going to get a room. Get this over with. Yeah. Woo-hoo! So, yeah, that was fun. And eventually, we just, we worked stuff out, and we did get married. And there are times when I can be really mean to him, but I catch myself. I can catch myself and go through those, where was I selfish and where was I dishonest, and where all those things came from this meeting, because there's no way I would have changed my 38 years of being with him And 38 years of sobriety, I was still doing all those things. And it wasn't until I got here that I learned about being considerate and all of those, what do they call them? The sex ideals. So I had to look up ideals because I didn't know what they were. What's an ideal? And so I, when I was doing my steps, I went through and I looked up ideals and I wrote down every single one, and I had a page and a half of ideals. And my sponsor said, no. Pick like 5. What are your top 5? And I did. So this is what I'm looking for in someone, and this is what I want to be to someone. So honesty, I want to be trustworthy, I want to be sympathetic, I want to be empathetic, and tender. And, we both fail at times, but we wouldn't be human if we didn't. And I can recognize when I'm failing at these ideals. And I hope over the years I might continue to pray and meditate, and that I work on these ideals daily. Thank you.
All right.